Lieutenant Commander George Castleman watched a German U-boat break the surface 700 yards off Pillsbury's bow at 11:15 on the morning of April 9, 1944, and felt something closer to frustration than triumph as his gun crews opened fire. 10 months commanding a destroyer escort, dozens of depth-charge attacks, 0 captures. The submarine dying in front of him, U-55 Fiend, belonged to one of Germany's deadliest aces. A captain who'd sent 25 Allied ships to the bottom, including a troop ship whose sinking had drowned over 600 men, women, and children. Within minutes, she'd slide backward under the Atlantic for good. 44 German sailors pulled alive from the water. By every measure the Navy trained for, it was a clean kill. Captain Daniel Gallery, watching from the carrier Guadalcanal, saw something else entirely. 10 full minutes where that submarine had simply floated on the surface, doing nothing, while his ships did exactly what they'd always done and destroyed her instead of taking her. No American warship had boarded and captured an enemy vessel at sea since 1815. 129 years, no procedures, no training, nobody in the modern Navy having seriously considered it possible. Gallery understood exactly what had just been lost with U-51-5. Codebooks, an intact Enigma machine, torpedo guidance technology the Allies had been trying to understand for years. All of it sent to the ocean floor because nobody had been ready to grab it first. He decided that next time, somebody would be. German U-boat crews were trained to scuttle within minutes of surfacing. Sea valves opened, demolition charges armed, codebooks destroyed, equipment smashed, captains who'd rather sink their own boat than hand it over intact. Any American sailor reaching a surfaced U-boat would be boarding a vessel actively flooding and rigged to explode, with an estimated 3 to 5 minutes before it went down for good. There was no equipment built for this task because the Navy had never needed any, and every captain in the fleet understood the standing doctrine perfectly. Find the submarine, kill it before it kills you, no margin for anything else. If you want to see how a destroyer escort crew trained to attempt something the Navy hadn't tried in over a century, hit that like button. It helps us bring you more stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Pillsbury. Castleman's boarding party fell to Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert David, 41 years old, a former enlisted sailor 25 years into a Navy career, the ship's assistant engineering officer, a man who understood pipes, valves, and how a hull stayed afloat better than almost anyone aboard. Nobody in living memory had boarded an enemy warship. David drilled his men daily on the fantail the moment Pillsbury cleared Norfolk on May 15th, climbing railings, leaping from a moving whaleboat onto a pitching deck, memorizing the layout of a German Type X U-boat from intelligence photographs alone, because there was no other way to prepare for a vessel none of them had ever set foot on. Gallery had secret authorization from the highest levels of naval command for this patrol, and the order underneath the routine paperwork read simply, "Bring one back alive." The task group sailed for the shipping lanes off the Cape Verde Islands and found nothing for days on end. The drilling continuing anyway, until every man aboard had the emergency procedures memorized past the point of usefulness. Nothing left to do but wait for a contact that might never come before the patrol's fuel and schedule ran out. It came on the morning of June 4th, 150 miles west of Cape Blanco, just as Gallery had ordered a course change toward Casablanca to refuel. The patrol, by every appearance, already finished. USS Chatelain's sonar caught a contact at 11:09, bearing steady, 800 yards, running submerged directly for the carrier itself. 2 Wildcat fighters dove to mark the position with machine gun fire on the water. At 11:16, Chatelain's depth charges went in, and 6.5 minutes later, the submarine broke the surface 700 yards off her bow. Bow first, rudder jammed, seawater pouring through cracked engine room pipes, circling helplessly to starboard at 5 or 6 knots, with nobody at the helm capable of steering her straight. German sailors scrambled through the hatches as the escorts opened fire with everything that would bear, one man falling dead on the deck before the rest simply threw up their hands and went over the side into the Atlantic. On Pillsbury's bridge, Castleman gave the order the entire voyage had been building toward. The whaleboat went over with David and 8 volunteers already inside, cutting straight into the wake of a submarine still circling, still sinking by the stern, chasing her like a wounded animal that hadn't yet realized it was finished. The boat closed alongside a hull, slick with oil and seawater. David grabbed the railing and pulled himself up, his men following without a word, one dead German sailor lying face down near the conning tower, and no other resistance visible anywhere on deck. He didn't hesitate at the hatch. He dropped straight into the control room, into near-total darkness broken only by red emergency lighting, water spraying from broken pipes, the deck already tilted, and the submarine actively flooding around him, with no way to know how many minutes remained before she simply went under with all of them still inside. His men fanned through the compartments, hunting for the source of the flooding, and found the sea strainer valve cover thrown open and discarded, screwed it back down, and felt the flooding slow but not stop. 13 separate demolition charges turned up scattered through the engine room, torpedo compartments, and control spaces, each one requiring its own search, its own inspection, its own careful disarming by men working half-blind in oily rising water, with timers running on devices none of them had ever seen before that morning. Above them, the still circling, unsteerable U-boat swung directly toward Pillsbury herself, forcing Castleman into an emergency maneuver that crushed the boarding party's own whaleboat between the two hulls and flooded 3 of Pillsbury's own compartments. A serious cost, but David's men stayed exactly where they were, still working, because the scuttling had stopped, and the submarine, wounded as she was no longer actively sinking. A second team arrived from Guadalcanal a few minutes later, led by Commander Earl Trocino, the carrier's chief engineer, who found David's men still pulling charges from hidden corners of a vessel, considerably larger than anyone had expected, over 250 feet long, 11 watertight compartments, every label and gauge in German, every system foreign to an engineer who'd never set foot inside a U-boat in his life before that afternoon. Trocino traced pipe runs by hand through bilge water for hours, identifying which pumps still worked, jury-rigging connections between compartments to redirect flooding until the submarine finally, slowly, stabilized rather than continuing to settle deeper by the stern. While Trocino fought to keep her afloat, David's team gathered what they'd actually come for: 2 intact Enigma cipher machines with their rotors still set, stacks of codebooks and operational orders, charts marking U-boat patrol zones across the entire Atlantic, roughly 900 pounds of classified material in total. In the forward torpedo room, they found something nobody in the Allied navies had ever gotten their hands on before: 2 acoustic homing torpedoes, weapons that tracked the sound of a ship's own propeller, technology that had been killing Allied escorts for months, without anyone fully understanding how. Gallery understood immediately what he was now responsible for. If the German Navy learned U-505 had been taken intact rather than sunk, every code and cipher setting aboard her would be worthless within hours, changed the moment Berlin suspected a leak, and this was days before the largest amphibious invasion in history was set to cross the English Channel. He ordered absolute silence, no radio transmissions describing the capture, no mentions in ship's logs, the 58 German prisoners isolated below decks, and forbidden contact with anyone. Their families back home informed only that they were missing, presumed dead, a fiction that would hold until 1947. Washington redirected the whole operation from Casablanca to Bermuda, 2,500 miles across open ocean, under tow for 15 days, through rough weather, with salvage crews working around the clock to keep a waterlogged, badly damaged submarine from finally sinking on the way. Not one of the roughly 3,000 American sailors who witnessed the capture breathed a word of it, in letters home or personal diaries, for the better part of a year. The silence held completely. At Bletchley Park in England, the captured Enigma machine and current codebooks turned months of previously unreadable intercepted German transmissions into an open book almost overnight, exposing U-boat positions, patrol patterns, and supply routes across the Atlantic during the exact weeks the Normandy invasion hung in the balance. The recovered acoustic torpedo let American engineers reverse engineer a countermeasure within months. Noise-making decoys called Foxers that gave the homing torpedoes something louder to chase than the ships they'd been sent to kill. German U-boat commanders reported the sudden torpedo failures to Berlin without ever suspecting the real cause. Admiral Karl Dönitz, assumed U-505 had simply been lost like hundreds of other boats that year, and never changed a single cipher setting because of her. The Battle of the Atlantic, which had threatened to strangle Britain's supply lines for 4 straight years, was effectively broken by the time Germany surrendered in May 1945, helped immeasurably by intelligence pulled from a single captured hull that, by rights, should have gone down with everything aboard her. Albert David never lived to receive his Medal of Honor, dying of a heart attack that September, 3 weeks before the ceremony. His widow accepted it from President Truman that October. U-505 herself avoided being scrapped for target practice only because Gallery personally campaigned to save her. And today, she sits on permanent display at Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry, the same conning tower hatch still there, that David dropped through not knowing whether the boat beneath his feet would sink, explode, or simply let him do his job. The only enemy warship the United States Navy has captured at sea since 1815, and it hasn't happened again since. If this story moved you the way it moved us, hit that like button. Everyone tells YouTube to put this story in front of more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing stories like this one out of the archive every single week. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if anyone in your family served in the Navy, we want to hear it. Thanks for watching, and thanks for making sure Albert David and the crew of USS Pillsbury don't disappear into silence.